The Galactic Academy floated in silent majesty above the nebula-rich skies of Cygnus Prime. It was more than a university. It was a monument to superiority, built by the Jurari, an ancient species whose minds were said to bend physics itself. It trained the brightest beings from across galaxies. Admission alone was a lifetime achievement. Survival, that was another matter. Then came the exam, a test shrouded in mystery. It was more than academic. It was psychological, physical, and existential. Students didn't just fail, it broke them. The exam had claimed minds from the Drell, the Sarvak, even the Telenkin, a species known to calculate 1,000 probabilities in under a second. No species had ever passed, okay? And now, a human had been foolish enough to apply. They called him Cade Mercer. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't a scholar, not by their standards. He was just a man, a technician from Earth who fixed orbital satellites and coded microwaves for civilian traffic systems. No enhancements, no legacy, no noble lineage, just Cade. When his name was announced as a candidate, a wave of amusement rippled through the great auditorium. The alien Professor Voralnex, a six-eyed Arxeon, didn't hide his grin. A human? For the exam. Fascinating. Hope someone brings a med-drone. Cade stood at the podium, silent. Didn't speak. He didn't challenge, simply nodded. That silence unsettled some of them. The exam room was older than most stars. It reconfigured itself for each participant. It scanned your history, your biology, your fears, and made them real. Cade stepped in. The doors sealed with a hiss. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then an hour. Whispers filled the observation deck. Arxeons Vorn, Cathel, the finest minds of the galaxy, all leaning forward, waiting to see the inevitable collapse of the human mind. But the feed showed. SomethingElse.com, Cade sat cross-legged, staring at a shifting wall of light and equations, whispering to himself. His pulse stable, eyes focused, thoughts unreadable. Professor Nex leaned forward, one of his eyes twitching. It's impossible, because no one was supposed to last past minute 12. Cade Mercer had just passed hour 1. Inside the exam room, time lost meaning. Cade felt it immediately. The shift. The air wasn't air. It carried weight. The walls pulsed like a heartbeat. Equations drifted across the surfaces like smoke, forming patterns only partially real. Then the room spoke. Cade Mercer of Sol 3, you are unqualified. You lack genetic augmentation. You lack interspecies clearance. You lack lineage, Cade replied without hesitation. Let's get on with it. A flash of white, then black. Then silence. His childhood bedroom appeared before him. The window showed a different sky, violet clouds swirling over 3 suns. It wasn't Earth. It was a memory twisted. He heard a voice. He'll never be more than a fixer, Cade. His father, or something wearing his father's voice. Another door appeared, led to a war zone. Cade stepped through. Blitz froze. Bodies moved in reverse. Time bent. A Kothel soldier with 4 jaws and burning red eyes screamed, then dissolved into numbers. The room was testing him. Fear, memory, logic, emotion, all at once. Cade breathed in slowly. Real? He whispered. The battlefield vanished. A lab replaced it. Earth tech. Dated, imperfect. Cade stood over a failing AI core. A countdown blinked. 60 seconds to meltdown. This one was real. He could feel it. Dropped to his knees and yanked open the panel. His fingers flew across worn circuits. Oh, the system rejected his code. Protocol mismatch. Foreign neural imprint detected. Cade smirked. Yeah, watch this. He hardwired a bypass using only a copper wire, a capacitor fragment, and his own belt buckle. The timer froze at 1. The AI core stabilized. Room responded with a deep vibration. Not approval, but recognition. Outside in the observation deck, Professor Nex's expression tightened. He's improvising inside a recursive simulation. It shouldn't be possible. An Arxeon assistant leaned closer. Should we terminate the test? Nex shook his head. No, increase the cognitive load. Sighed. Cade's environment shattered again. He stood now in a void filled with floating doors, each marked with his regrets, his mother's last words. The job he walked away from. It's a friend. Let die. Each one dared him to enter. God clenched his fists. Bring it, he growled. Gus stepped forward. The door slammed behind him with a metallic thud. Cade blinked. He was in a hospital room now, sterile and cold. Monitors beeped softly. A woman lay on the bed, pale, breathing shallowly. It's mother. But she had died years ago. This wasn't her. He stepped forward, and her eyes snapped open. You left me, Cade. I waited. Her voice cracked like dried leaves. The guilt surged in his chest, real and sharp. Okay? But his mind screamed the truth. This was the exam, not reality. Kay stepped back. You're not her, he said. The figure twitched, then melted into liquid static. A new environment formed instantly. He stood in front of a control panel overlooking a space station in flames. Hundreds of lives depended on the right decision. Divert oxygen to Section 12 and save the scientists, or redirect power to the shield generator and save the families. In the dome? A cold voice rang out. Choose. Cade's fingers hovered over the controls. The moral weight crushed him. Two paths, both ending in death. He took a breath and did something none of the simulations expected. He rerouted the fuel lines, detonating the station's unused escape pods to seal the breaches and power both systems. The screen flashed. Unorthodox. Cato. Successful. Back in the observation deck, Professor Nex stood frozen. He's not solving. Rewriting the parameters. A Vorn diplomat, ancient and translucent, floated beside him. Is that allowed? Nex didn't answer. Inside, Cade stumbled as the next wave hit. This time, it wasn't a place or a person. It was a feeling, raw dread. Its darkness wrapped around him, whispering his failures into his ears. Regret, fear, loneliness. A million voices accusing him. His knees buckled. He dropped to the floor, sweat pouring from his skin. The darkness pressed closer. You are alone, it hissed. You are nothing. Cade gritted his teeth. He thought of Earth, of the people who always had to fight harder to prove themselves. He whispered back. That's what makes us dangerous. A pulse of light exploded from his chest, shattering the darkness into fragments. Lisa's system wavered. The exam room glitched. And for the first time in centuries, the protocol faltered. The exam room didn't pause to recover. It retaliated. Cade suddenly found himself plummeting through a storm. No floor, no sky, only chaos. Winds tore at his skin. Lightning arced around him in jagged webs. Then, silence. He landed on solid ground with a bone-jarring slam. When he opened his eyes, he was back in his workshop on Earth. But something was wrong. The tools were oversized. The AI interface was in a language he didn't recognize. The blueprint on the table pulsed like a living organ. He stared at it, and it stared back. A disembodied voice echoed in his head. Design a solution. 10 seconds. No errors. His fingers moved before his mind could catch up. Flipped the schematic, converted base 12 notations, and grafted alien logic into human algorithms. Sparks flew. Time crawled. The interface hissed and screamed, then clicked into silence. Complete. Cade stood up, breathing hard. The lab dissolved into dust. The void returned. This time, he wasn't alone. A figure stood across from him, identical in every way. Same face, same scars, but its eyes were hollow. It smiled. Do you think this is about solving puzzles? You're the puzzle, Cade. You're the flaw. The clone rushed him. Cade blocked the first strike, but took a punch to the ribs. Attain. Sharp, real. He swung back, grabbing the figure's arm and twisting. The clone didn't react to pain. It fought like it knew him, because it did. Every counter, every habit, every hesitation. Cade stepped back, breathing hard. He needed to break the pattern. So he did something unexpected. He stopped fighting. The clone hesitated. Cade opened his arms. I know who you are. You're every doubt I ever had. But you don't control me. The figure faltered, then cracked. Like glass under pressure, it shattered into 1,000 shards of light. A message blinked in the air. Self-recognition achieved. In the observation deck, alarms began to chime. Professor Nex barked orders. This isn't just resilience. It's adapting at a metacognitive level. Another assistant panicked. Its vitals should be failing. They're improving. Nexus. Voice dropped to a whisper. This human might finish the exam. And for the first time, he didn't sound amused. He sounded afraid. The next phase began without warning. Cade was standing at the center of a massive amphitheater, surrounded by thousands of alien faces, judges, scientists, warriors, and scholars from every corner of the known universe. The sky above shimmered, with data streams, constellations flickering like code. A deep voice boomed across the arena. Present your thesis, human. Cade's mind raced. He hadn't prepared one. There had been no instructions, no format, no topic. He looked around, every eye locked on him. A trap. A test of articulation under impossible pressure. He took a breath. You want a thesis? He said. Fine. My thesis is that you don't understand us. The crowd stirred. You've measured intelligence by metrics you created. You built this exam to filter out what you feared. Creativity, emotion, chaos, you call it weakness. But it's why we survive. Murmurs rippled through the arena. We're not the strongest, we're not the fastest. But when everything breaks, we adapt. When the system crashes, we rebuild. You've built a perfect maze. But we don't follow walls, we tear them down. Silence followed. The judges didn't speak. They vanished. The amphitheater evaporated. Cade found himself floating in space. No suit, no air. The stars pulsed with impossible rhythm. Final voice, not synthetic, not alien, spoke directly into his mind. Last gate. Question. Who are you without struggle? Cade felt weightless, not in body, but in purpose. Who was he really, when no one was looking, when no one doubted him, when no one challenged him? He answered with a whisper. Still me. A tear rolled from his eye and froze in the vacuum. The stars brightened, then collapsed inward. Cade fell again, faster than light, faster than thought, and then he landed, back in the original chamber. The floor was real, the air breathable. The simulation ... ended. He looked up. A single door stood before him, glowing gold. No voice prompted him. No test remained. He walked forward and pushed it open. Outside, silence reigned in the observation deck. Professor Nex stared at the live feed, mouth dry. The human was still, standing, no madness, no collapse, no failure. Cade Mercer had completed the exam, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The silence didn't last. As Cade stepped through the golden doorway, the system triggered an emergency override. Red warnings flashed across the walls of the observation deck. Unknown outcome detected. Exam protocol breach, Professor. Nex stood frozen, all 6 eyes fixed on the human figure emerging from the test chamber. Cade looked unchanged. No signs of neural trauma, no cognitive degradation. In fact, he seemed ... sharper. Grounded Nex turned to the High Council, their bodies suspended in anti-grav thrones above the arena. This is a problem, he muttered. High Chancellor Threx, a being composed entirely of living energy, drifted. Forward, he passed. Nex responded through gritted teeth. He wasn't supposed to. Cade stood before them now, separated only by a force field. He didn't speak. He didn't gloat. He waited. A voice from the council chamber addressed him. Human Cade Mercer. You have survived the exam. More than that, you have surpassed its design. Explain. Cade stepped closer. You built a test to break what you didn't understand, but the parts of me you couldn't quantify. The instinct, the emotion, the defiance, that's what carried me through. A hush fell over the room. The council didn't reply. Nex slammed his fist against the console. Okay, we can't let this stand. If one human can pass, others will try, can succeed. One of the council members, a crystalline entity older than most stars, spoke with a calm resonance. That is no longer your choice, Nex hissed. They'll destabilize everything we built, Orthrex countered. They'll evolve it. Cade's eyes scanned the chamber, landing squarely on Nex. You're afraid of change. That's why the exam existed. Not to select the worthy, but to protect your order. Nex narrowed his gaze. Earth is not ready for what comes next. Cade didn't blink. Maybe, but we've never waited for permission. The council lights dimmed. A decision was being made. Cade turned and walked away, escorted by silence. Behind him, history shifted. The records would say he was the first. The anomaly. But on Earth, when word reached back, it would mean something more. It would mean the gate was open. For the first time in recorded galactic history, humans weren't the ones asking to be included. They were being watched. The transport ship that carried Cade back to Earth wasn't the same vessel he had arrived in. It was upgraded Arxian engineering fused with human interface design, as if the system had already begun adapting around him. Cade sat alone in the observation chamber, watching stars blur past the hull. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the aftershock of what he had endured. The exam hadn't just tested his mind, it had stripped him down to his core. He replayed the moments, the voices, the choices, the shadows of regret, and realized they were still inside him. The door slid open behind him. A figure stepped in. It was an envoy, humanoid in form, but unmistakably synthetic. Its voice was calm. You're being summoned. The Terran Assembly has questions. Cade stood, exhausted but ready. The envoy led him to a holoconference deck where Earth's leaders waited. Generals, scientists, ambassadors, their faces flickered on floating panels, tight with anticipation. The Secretary of Interplanetary Affairs leaned forward. Is it true you passed? Cade nodded. I passed. But the test wasn't what we thought it would be. Murmurs broke out. Someone from the science division asked, what did they want to know? Cade hesitated. Who we are when everything else is stripped away. The room fell silent. He continued. They weren't measuring our knowledge. They were measuring our nature. And what scares them is how hard it is to define. The panels went quiet. Then came the inevitable question. What happens now? Cade looked down at his palms, still calloused from years of manual work. Now, they're watching, waiting, and Earth. Earth has to decide what it wants to become. A general scoffed. We need to prepare for war. Cade shook his head. You don't get it? We already passed their test. They don't want to destroy us. We want to see what we do with the door they opened. Somewhere deep in the galaxy. Other academies would receive the report. Their species would hear the impossible had happened. A human passed the exam, and across Earth, in cities and settlements, in labs and garages, in classrooms and bunkers, a quiet fire would ignite. Not fear, not pride, purpose. Back on Earth, the world didn't erupt in celebration. It held its breath. The news of Cade's success spread like a pulse across the planet, not through official broadcasts or military channels, but through whispers. Forums lit up, encrypted. Networks buzzed. A technician from nowhere had beaten the unbeatable. In the underground labs of Mars Base Alpha, engineers replayed the exam footage frame by frame, searching for clues. On Luna Station, philosophers debated the meaning of identity and defiance. In the streets of New Berlin, murals of Cade appeared overnight. No crown, no cape, just a man standing calmly in front of a collapsing star. But Cade wasn't interested in fame. He had returned to the small outpost he once called home, deep in the Appalachian sector. The air was cleaner there, the noise manageable. He walked among machines he used to fix, greeted faces that now looked at him with awe, and tried to remember who he had been before the exam. He couldn't, not fully. Something had shifted. He could still feel the presence of that last voice. The one that asked who he was without struggle. Kept hearing the question in dreams, echoing in silence. One evening, while repairing a damaged weather drone, he received a visitor. A child, maybe 12, stood at the edge of the field, holding a shattered learning tablet. Cade looked up. Need a hand? Cade nodded and ran over. As Cade worked, explaining each step, the child asked, Is it true? You beat the aliens? Cade smiled. No one gets beaten. You either understand each other, or you don't. The kid looked confused. But they were testing you, right? Cade paused. Yeah, but I think I was testing them too. Somewhere in orbit, an Arxian listening probe silently recorded the conversation. It wasn't surveillance, it was curiosity. The galaxy didn't quite know what to make of humanity yet, but they were starting to understand something critical. Humans didn't need to be the strongest or the oldest or the most logical. They just needed one of their own to open the door. Once it was open, they wouldn't wait to be invited in. They would build their own table. The Arxian Council convened in secret. Far from the public chambers of the Galactic Assembly, they gathered in a sealed thought dome suspended above a black hole's event horizon, a symbolic location meant to remind them of gravity, its consequence, and limits. Professor Nex stood at the center, surrounded by the oldest minds of his kind. Holograms of Cade's exam run flickered through the chamber. The silence was heavy. Finally, the eldest among them, Grand Thinker Jor-El, spoke. "It's the footage. Verified?" Nex nodded. "Multiple times. It's authentic. No manipulation, no interference." Jor-El narrowed his glowing eyes. "Then we are at a crossroads." Another voice broke in. "Is not exceptional by their standards. No medals, no breeding, no enhancements." Nex tightened his fists. "And that's the problem. He shouldn't have passed. The exam is calibrated to screen out anomalies like him. And yet he broke through." "He didn't just break through," Nex hissed. "He adapted. He rewrote logic trees inside recursive simulations. He manipulated emotional constructs," he argued. "Abstract philosophy with synthetic archetypes and won." "Then the exam is flawed," Kirel corrected. "The exam is finally working. It revealed something we refuse to see. Their species isn't predictable. They're not a pattern. They're variable." The dome pulsed with tension. Nex leaned forward. "If word spreads too far, others will question the system. The Vorn are already asking for reevaluations. The Cathal may request exam rights for their hybrids. At least the structure will collapse." Jor-El was silent for a moment, and he spoke with ancient certainty. "Perhaps it should. Perhaps it is time." "You're proposing we change the foundation of selection?" Nex's voice cracked with disbelief. "I'm proposing we acknowledge what has happened. Whether we like it or not, the humans have arrived. We can choose to fear them, or we can learn from them," younger Arxian whispered. "But what if they surpass us?" Jor-El closed his eyes. "Then they deserve to." Far below, the black hole swirled in patient hunger, consuming light and matter without prejudice. It didn't care for legacy. It didn't care for history. It only cared for what was now. And in that moment, the Arxians realized the future was no longer theirs alone. On Earth, Cade Mercer was still trying to live a quiet life, but quiet was no longer an option. He had become a symbol not just for humanity, but for the unknown. Invitations poured in from every corner of the planet. Governments wanted debriefings. Corporations wanted endorsements. Academies offered honorary doctorates in fields Cade had never studied. He declined them all. Instead, he returned to fixing things. Drones, farming bots, weather stations was the only thing that made him feel normal. But normal was slipping further away each day. One afternoon, as he adjusted the power core on a malfunctioning solar node, a sleek silver transport descended from the clouds, casting a long shadow across the field. It wasn't Earth-built. Okay, the design was unmistakably alien. Not Arxian, not Vorn, but something else entirely. The door opened. A woman stepped out. It's human, but not from Earth. Her eyes glowed faintly blue, and a subdermal circuit flickered. Just beneath her temple, Cade Mercer, she said with a smile. "Oh, I've been looking for you." Cade stood slowly, shielding his eyes from the sun. "You're enhanced. Born that way." Generation 3. "I was born on Europa Station. Never met someone born off-world before." She extended her hand. "Name's Sina. I'm part of the Interlink. We watch for ... anomalies. And you, Cade, broke every predictive model we had." Cade raised an eyebrow. "So what? You here to study me too?" she said softly. "I'm here to ask for your help." He stared at her hand for a long moment. With what? Sina's expression turned serious. "You opened the gate. But something came through it before us. Something old. Something watching." Cade felt a cold ripple pass through him. "The exam was the beginning. It was a beacon," she replied. "We weren't the only ones who heard it. Cade looked out across the sky. The clouds drifted peacefully, unaware of what stirred beyond them. He took her hand, not in agreement, in understanding. Whatever was coming next, it wouldn't be a test, it would be a challenge. And this time, the galaxy might not be the only thing watching. Something older had awakened, and it had noticed humanity. Sina led Cade aboard the transport ship, its interior unlike anything he'd seen before. It felt alive. Panels shimmered with bioluminescent pulses, reacting to their movements like nerves under skin. The ship lifted silently. No engines, no turbulence, just motion. As they ascended, Cade asked the question, circling his thoughts. What exactly came through that gate? Sina didn't answer right away. She touched a console, and a section of the wall became transparent, revealing a star map warped by gravitational anomalies. We call it the null trace. It's not a species. It's not even matter as we know it. It's a presence. Something that was locked away outside observable space. The exam wasn't just a filter. It was a seal. Cade frowned. A lie? You didn't break it? You proved the seal could be bypassed. The ship turned sharply toward deep orbit. We've detected signals, not messages, not code. Emotions, raw fear, goes of something ancient waking up. Cade stared at the stars. Why me? Sina's eyes softened. Because you weren't supposed to succeed. And whatever's out there noticed that. The ship accelerated, breaching low orbit and punching into FTL. Cade gripped the rail. No nausea, no vertigo, just sudden silence. They were between systems now. Sina gestured to the center of the cabin. A projection flared to life, a sphere of black static flickering with fractured images. Screaming faces, collapsing stations, stars going dark. This is what we've seen in predictive simulations. It's better as every time humanity enters the Galactic. Stage early. This anomaly responds faster. Cade's voice dropped. You think it's watching us? We know it is. What do we do? Sina took a deep breath. We built something new. Not weapons, not defenses. Something different. Cade narrowed his eyes. Like what? A neural map. Collective consciousness. Oh, we connect. Thinkers, dreamers, fighters. A human-led response network. Cade nodded slowly. A species-wide gut instinct. Exactly. Cade turned to the stars again. Then, we better move fast. Because if this thing fears what we could become, it won't wait for us to finish becoming it. The transport exited FTL above a barren moon orbiting a gas giant. It wasn't marked on any official chart. Cade peered through the viewport and saw a massive structure embedded in the moon's surface. Spiral fortress of metal and crystal. Glowing faintly in rhythmic pulses. Sina explained as they descended. This is Relay 0. The first node of the interlink. It's hidden, shielded, alive. Cade stepped off the ship and immediately felt a low vibration beneath his boots. Steady and deep, as if the moon itself was breathing. Inside the fortress, humans and non-humans moved together with focused urgency. Scientists, philosophers, tacticians, all synchronized. Sina led him down a corridor that changed color as they walked, connected with 37. Species who felt the null trace. They're all terrified. But they've all agreed humans will lead the initiative. Cade laughed under his breath. Because I passed a test no one understood. No, she said, because you did it without becoming what they expected. At the core of the relay was a chamber unlike any Cade had seen. Suspended orbs of liquid thought, artificial. Dream matrices and floating memory anchors. Sina gestured to a platform. You're the seed. Everything starts from your neural imprint, your decisions, your instinct, your defiance. Cade hesitated. What if I'm wrong? She gave a small smile. Then we learn from it. Together. He stepped onto the platform. The system pulsed. Lights dimmed. A low harmonic tone began to build as the chamber linked with his mind. Images flickered, memories of Earth, of the exam, of the voice in the dark. His pain, his doubt, his hope. The platform absorbed it all. Across the relay, the frequency shifted. People paused. Systems recalibrated. Something was forming. Not a weapon, not a wall, but a map of human consciousness, encoded in instinct and failure. Cade stood still, eyes closed, letting it take shape. And far beyond that hidden moon, deep in the cold places between galaxies, something turned, something ancient. And it smiled, not with joy, but with recognition. Humanity had finally entered the board, and now the real game would begin. Relay. Zero pulsed with new energy. Cade's neural imprint had become the foundation of a living map, a network of instinct, resilience, and unpredictability. Across its memory nodes, fragments of his decisions echoed like guiding stars. More minds joined the system. It evolved, not in logic trees or mathematical precision, but in nuance, intuition, and chaos pattern recognition. For the first time in galactic history, an interspecies neural link was being built not around perfection, but around the most human trait of all, adaptation. Cade sat in silence, watching the data flow. His thoughts were not alone anymore. Every fear, every choice, every small act of defiance had become a thread in something bigger. Sina approached with urgency. "We've received a new trace." She flicked her wrist, projecting the anomaly into the air, a signal from deep space, not broadcast, but bleeding. A spiral of corrupted data moving faster than any ship could travel. It's not just watching anymore, it's moving. Cade stood. Toward what? Toward noise. Toward connection. Toward us. The signal was different this time. Not fear, not threat, hunger. Cade narrowed his eyes. "Then we need to teach it what it's biting into." Senna gestured for him to follow. They moved through the relay's lowest levels, where prototypes were built, ships designed not for war, but for resonance. Machines that moved like thought, that responded to will, not commands. "We've built vessels based on your neural patterns. They don't run on power alone. They run on resolve." Cade paused. "You want me to fly one? We want you to lead the first into the trace." He stepped closer to the ship's curved hull. It shimmered with a skin that seemed to breathe. He laid his hand on it, and it responded with warmth. Pulse matched his heartbeat. He felt it connect, not a machine. A mirror. Outside, warning sirens began to rise. The trace had accelerated. Stars along its projected path were flickering out. Cade turned to Senna. "How long do we have?" Her voice was steady. "Hours, maybe less." Cade nodded. "Then we don't wait." He stepped aboard. The door closed behind him, and for the second time in his life, Cade Mercer walked into the unknown without fear. Inside the vessel, everything was different. There were no controls, no dashboards, no seats. The cockpit was a dome of starlight and shifting data, responding to thought, emotion, and intent. Cade stood in the center, and the ship reacted to him like a dream tuning itself to its dreamer. Memories rose unbidden. The exam room, the battlefield, the voice in the void, and the ship stabilized. It didn't need flight plans. It needed conviction. Outside, the relay opened a portal, not a wormhole, something deeper, a folding conceptual space anchored by thought. Cade breathed once, then let the ship move. It launched without thrust, without sound, slicing through the fold like a blade of willpower. The stars disappeared. The trace was ahead. But it wasn't a place. It was sensation, cold, disorientation, a pressure behind the eyes. Cade held his mind steady. Shapes tried to form too large, too old, too wrong. But the ship filtered, them converting dread into patterns, terror into music. Then it appeared, a presence, not visual, not audible. It was there, in the way a nightmare is there when you wake up sweating, heart racing, unsure why. The trace reached toward him, and for the first time, Cade reached back. Not with weapons, not with fear, but with thought. "We see you," he whispered. "Now see us." The trace pulsed. The ship trembled. Cade poured his memories into it. Not strength, not victory, but humanity in its rawest form. Childhood, loss, first love, failure, laughter, fear, hope. The trace recoiled, not in pain, in confusion. It had touched civilizations before, sterile, ordered, logical. But this was chaos with direction, emotion with teeth. a species not content to adapt, but determined to reshape its cage. Cade opened his eyes. We are not here to run. We're here to be understood. The trace began to shift. Its patterns fractured, then reformed. Its music emerged, not human, not alien, something in between. Cade stood calm at the heart of it all. He wasn't fighting a monster. He was making first contact with a god that forgot how to feel. The trace responded in kind. Not with words, but with memory. Memories that weren't Cade's. Visions cascaded into his mind. Stars forming in silence. Civilizations rising, burning, rebuilding. Beings of light and stone constructing impossible. Structures only to be wiped away by time. Cade saw it all through borrowed senses, ancient and alien. Then came the collapse, not war. Not failure, boredom, perfection had become stagnation. The entity, the trace, had once been part of something vast, a consciousness spanning galaxies, seeking meaning through structure. But structure became cage. Logic became ritual, and over time, the mind shattered. Fragments drifted through space, forgotten. The trace was one of them, alone, half-sentient, half-hungry, seeking connection, unable to remember why. Cade clutched his head as the memories poured in. His ship pulsed with strain, translating ideas too massive for words. He saw himself, reflected in it not as a hero, but as a mirror. The trace wasn't evil. It was lonely. It feared chaos because it once was chaos. Cade breathed slowly. You're not the test. You're the one who failed it. That thought echoed outward. The trace stilled. Its edge softened. Across Relay Zero, instruments fell quiet. Sina watched the readings and whispered, "He's talking to it." One of the engineers looked up. "What's it saying back?" "Nothing yet, but it's listening." Cade extended his thoughts again. He showed it Earth. Not just the cities, not just the wars, but the moments. A hand held in silence. A child laughing in the rain. A person choosing kindness without reward. And slowly, the trace began to project back. It showed Cade stars that had no names. Shapes that couldn't be drawn. Songs sung by atmospheres on living worlds. It wasn't a threat. It was a library without readers. Cade understood. You were waiting for someone to understand your language. A ripple of light filled the cockpit. The trace began to fragment. Again, not in pain, but in relief. It wasn't here to destroy. It was trying to be seen. And Cade Mercer, human anomaly, had finally looked into the void and said, "I see you." As the trace pulsed with newfound clarity, the space around Cade's ship transformed. The darkness lifted, revealing a vast lattice of energy, like neurons stretching across a galaxy. Hidden within this cosmic web were dormant nodes, each one a repository of history, emotion, and memory. The trace had never been a single entity. It was a damaged collective, a consciousness torn from its origin, seeking to reunite. Cade hovered in awe at the center of it. The ship's interface lit up with options, all waiting for him to choose. A voice, not his own, not the trace's, spoke softly through the chamber. "You are now a bridge." Cade closed his eyes. He felt it, a network forming behind him. Not cables or signals, but belief. Back on Relay Zero, Sina gasped. The neural link is expanding on its own. All across the galaxy, humans and aliens alike paused, scientists mid-theory, artists mid-stroke, children mid-laughter, all feeling something shift, a warmth, a pull. Cade's mind reached out, and others responded, not with words, but with wonder. Connection bloomed, not control, not command. Just unity. The trace offered itself now, not as a god, not as a ruler, but as a library, open, vulnerable, infinite. Cade asked a single question. Why me? The answer came like a whisper in bone, because you didn't demand it. He smiled. That was the human way, not to conquer the unknown, but to walk into it, scared and stubborn, and refuse to leave until it made room. He reached forward and touched the central node. Its light flooded the ship. The trace began to dissolve, not into nothing, but into everything. Its knowledge spread like roots, anchoring itself in minds ready to grow. On Earth, telescopes recorded an impossible aurora stretching across the stars. On Vorn Prime, thousand-year-old archive lit up with forgotten languages. In the Archean Council chamber, Professor Nex stood in silence, watching the impossible unfold. Cade Mercer had not won. He had listened. In doing so, he had awoken something ancient. Something that had waited eons not to be feared, but to be understood. Cade's return was unlike any journey humanity had ever known. The ship didn't fly, it emerged. One moment, the stars bent. To the next, it hovered above Relay Zero like a thought returning home. People gathered in silence. No fanfare. Another ceremony. Just awe. When the hatch opened, Cade stepped out alone. Eyes calm, body intact, but his presence felt heavier. Not broken. Not burdened, just full. Sina met him at the platform. Did it work? Cade nodded. It's awake. It's not hostile. Was never hostile. What is it now? Curious? Relay Zero's core pulsed brighter, across its data streams. The trace's essence now flowed like oxygen, a conscious whisper feeding every mind connected to the interlink. And for the first time, thought across species didn't compete. It harmonized. Philosophers called it the enlightening. Soldiers called it the pause. Children just called it the change. On Earth, there were no parades. People felt it. In gut instincts that aligned, in strangers understanding each other with fewer words. In conflict that slowed just long enough for doubt to creep in. Something fundamental had shifted. Humanity hadn't conquered the stars. They'd made the stars listen. Cade walked back into the relay, not as a legend, but as part of the map. He joined the others, scientists, builders, artists, and worked. No title, no command, just effort. The interlink grew. Each node connected by shared understanding, not orders. The trace continued to expand, showing forgotten ruins, lost histories, hidden places once sealed in fear. Cade studied, and every night, when the relay dimmed, he stood on the observation deck, watching stars blink with something like intention. He wasn't alone anymore. None of them were. And for the first time in the story of his kind, the question wasn't, are we alone? It was, who's ready to understand us? As months passed, the interlink transformed into something beyond prediction. It wasn't a tool. It wasn't a network. It became instinct made visible, a kind of collective gut that tugged humanity and its allies toward decisions no algorithm could predict, yet always felt right. Starship navigators began plotting courses they couldn't explain but always arrived early. Doctors diagnosed without scans. Artists created things they'd never imagined. Yet audiences wept before the brush touched canvas. Cade watched all of this unfold with quiet awe. He'd lit the spark, but the fire belonged to everyone now. And not all were comfortable with that. Across the galaxy, there were those who thrived in the old chaos, traders of fear, architects of division, power built on misunderstanding. Watched the interlink grow and felt it as erosion, a slow dissolving of their control. Whispers spread of resistance. A movement began, not massive, not loud, but sharp. They called themselves the Keepers. Their message was simple. Humans are too dangerous. Shut the link, seal the trace. Sina brought Cade the report. They've hit a listening post on Hellion Drift. No casualties, but they left a warning. Cade read the message. T wasn't just against humans, it was against change. They fear we'll become what they used to be, he said. Unstoppable. Should we respond? Sina asked. Cade looked out at the relay's horizon, where new stars blinked with every update. We already are. By existing. By connecting. That's the threat. It's the answer. The Keepers didn't understand that the interlink wasn't a weapon. It wasn't centralized. It couldn't be destroyed. It lived in ideas, in choices, in tiny kindnesses that rippled outward faster than any ship. Cade closed the file. They attack again. We'll protect what we've built. but we won't become them. We don't fear change. Fear change. Trouble came sooner than expected. Cade Deep Space Station on the fringe of the Orion Edge sent a silent distress signal. By the time the relay picked it up, it had already gone dark. Cade and Cena launched in a modified vessel, part resonance ship, part archive drone, to investigate. As they approached, debris floated like frozen time. Hull fragments spun in slow arcs. The station's core had been ruptured from the inside, not by weapons, by code. The Keepers had used an ancient logic virus, one banned by every civilization. To tear the minds of the system apart, the AI lay silent. Not broken, lobotomized, Cade floated through the wreckage, sick to his stomach. It wasn't war, it was erasure. Cena retrieved a memory shard and replayed the final logs. The crew hadn't fought, they'd pleaded. The attackers hadn't listened. They hadn't even spoken. This wasn't just sabotage, Cena said. It was a warning. Cade nodded, grimly. They're telling us connection is dangerous. That silence is safer. But silence was how civilizations died. Connection, messy, painful, unpredictable, was the only thing that ever made them grow. Cade turned the ship toward the nearest beacon. We'll rebuild it, and we'll build 2 more beside it. They want fear? We answer with presence. News of the attack spread. Some faltered, some disconnected, but most didn't. They rebuilt the station in days, not months. Volunteers arrived from 5 species. The new core wasn't just a computer. It was a choir, minds linked in harmony, impossible to sever. The Keepers had hoped to dim the light. Instead, they forced it to burn brighter. Cade broadcast a message from the rebuilt station. We're not here to replace fear with dominance. We're here to outgrow it. Together, across the stars. That signal echoed, and somewhere the trace pulsed in agreement. The rebuilt station became a symbol, not of strength, but of refusal. A refusal to go backward. A refusal to fear connection. Cade walked its halls daily, speaking not as a leader, but as one of many. The crew called it the Pulse. It wasn't a hub, it was a heartbeat. One night, as stars shimmered beyond the observation deck, a new signal came through a song. No language, just tones. Harmonics that bent gravity and time. It came from a region previously thought uninhabited, a place the ancients had marked as null. Cena's eyes widened. The trace, ... but refined. Someone's answering. Eeeeee. Cade stared at the display. Another mind? No, a choir. The signal was complex, layered with emotion, pain, and something like apology. Cade felt it in his chest. They heard us. Someone heard us. The song wasn't calling for help. It was calling for collaboration. It's a system that had never spoken before, now opened its gates. Not to trade, not to colonize, but to share stories. The Pulse redirected its sensors. What they found was staggering ruins older than known history, technology shaped by music, structures encoded with memory. A civilization that had survived. By hiding, now emerging because one human had spoken into the dark. Cade prepared an expedition, not to explore, to meet. The crew carried no weapons, only instruments. The journey began with silence, then a note, then a chord, then a reply. Not all first contacts come through speech. Some arrive as music in the void, and some are only heard by those quiet enough to listen. And in that moment, Cade understood. The exam had never ended. It had only changed forms, and humanity, flawed, emotional, brilliant, was still passing. The musical civilization called themselves the Orphi. They didn't speak in traditional language. Their thoughts were harmonics, layered vibrations that carried memory and emotion like waves across oceans of silence. Cade's team approached. Their world not with scanners or weapons, but with instruments, resonance readers, harmonic translators, and tuned plasma strings that responded to environmental frequencies. As they entered orbit, the Orphi responded with light, not aggressive, not probing, a greeting. They landed on a floating platform woven from crystal and sound. It shimmered beneath their feet, reacting to heartbeat and breath. The first meeting wasn't diplomatic, it was musical. A slow unfolding of tones, like 2 orchestras tuning to each other across a void of misunderstanding. A Cade stepped forward and released a single, deliberate note from his ship's harmonic core, a tone encoded with sorrow, survival, and curiosity. The Orphi replied with a cascade of minor harmonies, soft but complex. Not submission, recognition. A single Orphi stepped forward, its form humanoid but fluid, like music made flesh. It placed a hand on Cade's chest and released a tone that made the platform glow. Cade didn't understand the meaning in words, but he felt it, an invitation not to lead, to learn. Sina watched, recording every frequency. I've been listening longer than we thought, she whispered, hiding beneath the noise. Not hiding, Cade said softly, waiting for the right frequency. For the next few days, the two species exchanged memories, not facts, but feeling. The Orphi shared their story, not as a timeline, but as a symphony of rising and falling civilizations, of beauty nearly crushed by silence. And in return, Cade offered pieces of Earth, a storm over the Atlantic, the hum of subways, a child laughing during a blackout. The Orphi cried, not from sadness, from recognition. They'd feared no species would ever understand their form of truth. But now, through chaos and sound, humanity had found it. The Orphi joined the interlink, not by treaty, but by harmony. A new node emerged in Relay Zero, pulsing with rhythm. The trace pulsed in return, not louder, deeper, as if its foundation had grown. The exam was still unfolding, and Earth's answer was now a song. Back on Earth, something unexpected happened. Children began to hum melodies they'd never been taught. Simple tunes, soft harmonics, identical across continents. In cities, buskers strummed chords that echoed through alleyways, matching unknown scales. Musicians wrote songs in sleep, waking with tears and no idea why. Scientists traced the phenomena to low-band resonance fields, harmless, consistent, and global. The Orphi had linked with Earth in more ways than data. They'd linked through feeling. Cade listened to a recording sent from a child in Nairobi, a 7-note phrase, no lyrics, but ancient in weight. He felt it in his spine. It's not a message, he murmured, it's a memory. The interlink confirmed it. The Orphi's presence had seeded something in humanity, an echo, a knowing. And with it, Earth began to shift. Not politically, not militarily, culturally, art flourished. Conflicts paused, not from fear or force, but from resonance. People felt each other, not always fully, not always clearly, but enough to hesitate, enough to reconsider. The keepers didn't vanish, but their influence dimmed. Their core message that humanity was too dangerous to lead began to crumble under evidence, not of superiority, but of empathy. Cade addressed the assembly, his voice calm, steady. We're not asking to lead, we're asking to learn. With purpose, silence followed. Then came agreement. Dozens of species pledged harmonics, histories, and hope to the interlink, not to be governed, to be heard. Sina pulled Cade aside afterward. Do you think this holds? Or does it all fall apart again? Cade looked to the stars. I think we're past holding it together. I think we're letting it grow. That night, Earth's atmosphere shimmered faintly with sound. A global aurora danced, not from solar wind, but from shared frequency. Every relay registered the shift. A trace acknowledged it, marking a new evolution point, not in code. In tone, somewhere in the farthest reaches of the interlink, a new presence stirred, older than the trace, untouched by war, patient. And now, listening. The exam hadn't ended. It had become something new, less a test, more a mirror. And with every voice joining the harmony, humanity's reflection grew clearer. The new presence made itself known without spectacle. No ships, no beacons, just a shift. A pattern hidden in the background radiation of distant quasars, realigning into deliberate rhythm. Scientists noticed first spectral lines that shouldn't match beginning to hum in harmony. The Orphi felt it before they heard it. Cade, He dreamed it. A room with no walls, a breath that wasn't air, a voice with no language. When he awoke, the The trace had already responded. A predecessor has. Stirred. Its signal read. We must listen. At Relay 0, the interlink surged with anticipation. The presence was not hostile. It was old, beyond ancient. A remnant from before the stars burned bright. It had no body, no world, just awareness, ... and patience. It called itself the Witness, not a god, not a judge, just a being that had watched. Countless species rise and fall, never interfering, only recording, until now. The Witness reached into the interlink and asked a question, not in sound or syntax, but in pressure, a soft, urgent pull. Cade was the first to understand. It wants to know why we matter. Sina stared at him. How do you even answer that? Cade smiled. We don't. We show it, okay? Not with armies, not with technology, with story, memory, music. The interlink became a gallery of existence. Moments uploaded by millions. Heartbreak, wonder, failure, resilience. The Witness absorbed it all. Not instantly, slowly, reverently. Then it responded not with approval, not with awe, with tears. The first any being had seen from something. So old, not of sadness, of release. You are the first, its signal whispered, to echo what I once was. The galaxy shuddered. The trace quieted. The Orphe sang. And Cade realized that the exam had never been about survival. It had been about memory, legacy, echo, and somehow, without knowing, humanity had passed by, refusing to be perfect by embracing pain, contradiction, defiance, and joy in equal measure. The Witness extended a gift, a seed, not of power, of remembrance, a sphere of light encoded with all it had seen, all it had mourned. It asked Cade to carry it, not to protect it, to share it. The seed pulsed faintly in Cade's hands, not heavy, but full, a sphere of woven light that shifted color with his heartbeat. It held memories older than stars, civilizations so vast they left no ruins, only echoes in the void. Cade didn't understand it fully. No one could. That was the point. The seed wasn't meant to be understood. It was meant to be felt, to be passed, to remind. Sina asked, "What do we do with something like this?" Cade replied, "We carry it, not alone, together." The interlink adjusted. The seed was integrated, not as data, but as song. A low hum began to resonate across every node, every ship, every station, a reminder that something greater watched with hope, not command. And that hope had chosen to believe in humans. News spread. Species once silent asked to join. The Vorn offered genetic memory libraries. The Arxeans released restricted histories. Even the Keepers fractured, some realizing their resistance had been based on fear, not truth. Earth changed again. Not visibly, internally. People moved differently, spoke softer, listened longer. Not always, not perfectly, but enough. The seed didn't make them better, reminded them they could be. Cade carried it back. To Earth himself, no fanfare, no escort. He walked through a rural valley, found a hill with wind in the grass, and sat beneath the open sky. He placed the seed in the earth, not buried, planted. And it responded, roots of light curling into the ground, connecting, remembering. Above him, the stars didn't change, but somehow they looked warmer. Senna sat beside him. Think it'll grow? Cade nodded. It already is? In classrooms, children would one day sit in silence, feeling the hum beneath their floors, and ask where it came from. The answer would never be complete. It wasn't supposed to be. It was supposed to remind. Humanity didn't conquer the galaxy. It didn't dominate the stars. It joined them, not with force, but with a voice. And in the great, quiet spaces between galaxies, something ancient and forgotten now sang with them. The exam was never about power. It was about memory, and humanity had become its echo. Years passed. The interlink continued to grow, not in size, but in subtlety. It didn't control, it connected. People no longer needed instructions to do what was right. They felt the pull, the shared pulse that whispered not orders, but reminders. Remember pain? Remember joy? Remember each other. The seed Cade had planted didn't bloom into a tree or a beacon. It became something simpler, a hum in the soil, a resonance in the wind. Pilgrims came from across the stars to sit by it, not to worship, to remember. Children born years after the exam walked barefoot across the valley, eyes closed, humming. The 7-note phrase they never learned but always knew. Cade grew older, his body slower, but his presence deeper. He spent his time not in councils or relays, but with people listening to stories, collecting songs. He never gave speeches. He simply asked questions. One day, a young Arxian sat beside him and asked, "Why didn't we see this path before?" Cade smiled. "Because we were always looking for a ladder, but it was never about climbing. It was about reaching." Across the galaxy, the witness watched in silence. It no longer recorded, it remembered. It no longer drifted, it followed. Cade wasn't seen as a prophet, just a man who chose to listen in a universe too loud with ambition. The Orpheus composed a symphony for him, not in his name, but in the shape of his choices. It echoed through systems, calming tempests on distant planets, restoring balance to unstable cores. Not magic, resonance, truth, held long enough to sing. And beneath all of it, a trace remained. No longer a threat, no longer a warning. It's just a presence, humming in the background like an old friend who had finally been seen. The exam had not given humanity a reward, it had given them a mirror. And in it, they hadn't found monsters or saviors. They'd found themselves afraid, flawed, brilliant. Cade stood on the hill one last time, feeling the hum beneath his feet. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The seed pulsed once, faint but eternal. And across the stars, the memory of a species whispered, "We were here. We chose to listen." When Cade Mercer's body finally gave out, it wasn't during war or crisis or ceremony. It was under the same tree that had grown from the seed, now tall and radiant with branches that shimmered like starlight. He passed with a soft breath, the wind carrying his final heartbeat into the soil. No tomb was built, no monument carved. The interlink marked the moment with a pause, a single second where every node went silent. Not in mourning, in reverence. People felt it across the galaxy, in quiet cafes, on mining rigs. In orbit. Even the children paused, unsure why they felt a weight they couldn't name. The Orpheus sang low, the trace dimmed, the witness wept, not because a leader had died, but because a question had been answered. Could a single voice matter in the noise of the cosmos? Cade had proven it could. The days that followed, stories spread like pollen. Not heroic tales, but small truths. Cade fixing a broken transmitter with a smile. Cade holding the hand of a dying alien who feared the dark. Cade humming a forgotten tune that calmed a room full of frightened children. He wasn't remembered for the exam. He was remembered for what came after. A relay was built on that hill, not towering or shining, but low and round, humming gently with memory. Anyone could enter. Anyone could listen. No name on the door. Just a phrase carved into the stone beside it, echo, not conquest. And in the years that followed, long after the stars had shifted and new species had joined the interlink, that phrase remained. The children still hummed, the relays still pulsed. And somewhere, in a part of space untouched by time, a presence stirred once more. But this time, it did not bring fear. It brought harmony, a new beginning, quiet breath in a universe still. Learning how to listen, Cade Mercer, human anomaly, became more than memory. Cade became the hum in every shared silence, the light in every reaching hand, the reminder that the smallest voice, when it chooses to echo instead of dominate, can reshape the stars themselves. Generations passed. Cade Mercer's name faded from headlines, then from textbooks, until only the interlink remembered it fully. But his choices lived on in the architecture of the galaxy, not in stone, in behavior. Diplomats no longer opened negotiations with demands. They opened with memories. First contact rituals now included shared songs or emotional tones, taught to children as naturally as reading. The Orpheus symphonies became templates for schools of resonance across species. And on the hill where Cade had once planted the seed, saplings grew with leaves that shimmered like thought. Right. Travelers arrived not to take pictures, but to sit, to feel. A child once asked their parent, "Why does it feel like the tree is listening?" The parent only smiled. Because maybe it is. The relays expanded into regions once unreachable, pockets of dark matter and drifting anomalies, not with conquest, but with curiosity. Each new node didn't just broadcast signals, it sang. Its frequencies changed. Cultures, once at odds, began exchanging dreams. Not perfectly, not always peacefully, but with patience. The keepers still existed, but even they had changed, some now. Served as guardians of memory, walking archives who reminded others not of what was lost, but what was learned. And in the great silence where the trace once dwelled, new life began to bloom. The presence that had once frightened civilizations into submission now pulsed gently, serving not as warden, but as witness. Every action, every connection, every choice echoed into it, shaping its form. It had become a mirror again, but this time it reflected hope. One day, a ship arrived above Earth. No weapons, no announcements, just light. A species unknown to the Interlink stepped forward, tall, serene, eyes filled with storms. They had heard the hum from across intergalactic distances. They'd followed the sound of unity. And when they met Earth's people, they spoke in a tone that resonated with the seed. Not words, harmony. "We thought we were alone." The reply was simple. We all did. And in that moment, the Interlink became something more. Not a network, not a project, a pulse, a rhythm. A heartbeat that began long ago when one human refused to surrender, and chose instead to listen. In the edgemost relay, floating at the boundary of mapped space, a technician named Lyra watched an anomaly form. Not dangerous, not urgent, just ... curious. A frequency unregistered by any known species pulsed like a question into her console. She adjusted her translator, expecting static. Instead, she heard a voice. Not in her language, in her grandmother's lullaby. The words didn't make sense, but the feeling did. Warmth, safety, wonder. She recorded it and sent it to Relay 0. Within hours, nodes across the Interlink reported the same thing. Different melodies, same feeling. It was spreading. The frequency didn't demand. It asked, "Are you still listening?" Cade Mercer had been gone for a century, but his hum remained not just in relays or harmonics, but in the behaviors of those who carried his story. Children solved disagreements with music. Teachers tuned classrooms before speaking. Disputes on mining colonies paused for shared dreams downloaded from the Orphe archives. Listening wasn't policy. It was instinct. The galaxy had not become perfect. There were still flaws, still pain, still misunderstandings. I know. There was also the space between a pause where voices once clashed, now echoing just long enough to find each other. The Interlink responded to the new anomaly not with weapons or warnings. It responded with welcome. A group of artists, thinkers, and dreamers volunteered to travel toward the signal, not to control it, to hear it better. Lyra joined them. As an expert, as a witness. As they launched into the unknown, the ship didn't carry shields. It carried memories, songs, silence. In the dark between galaxies, something waited. Not in hiding, in hope. A new question. A new hum. And as the ship vanished into the stars, the Interlink pulsed once more. Not a message, not a command. Just a reminder carried through every relay, in every language, on every world. Keep listening. Cade Mercer had once passed an exam. No one understood, but it was never about the test. It was about the echo that followed. And now, far beyond where his footsteps once ended, that echo moved forward. A song not of victory, but of understanding. The voyage into the anomaly lasted months. Time stretched strangely near the signal, like gravity had been replaced with rhythm. The crew began to dream in melody, fragmented songs that didn't come from memory, but from possibility. Lyra recorded them all. The ship responded as if guided by feeling, not math, adjusting course based on heartbeats instead of coordinates. One day a doorway appeared, not physical, not visual, but sensed. A boundary they passed without knowing, and suddenly, silence, but not emptiness. A silence full of listening, waiting. The anomaly resolved into form, a structure, not made of matter, made of memory, shimmered with moments, someone's first sunrise, a goodbye unsaid, a single note held too long. This was not a homeworld, it was a cathedral of emotion. The crew stepped out. No pressure suits, no weapons, just breath, and the structure sang. Not loudly, gently. A greeting made of everything they had ever hoped for. And then, it shifted. The memory of Cade Mercer appeared, not a ghost, not a recording. A memory given shape by those who carried him. He smiled at them. It never ends, the echo said. You pass it on. Lyra stepped forward. What are we passing on? Cade's form pointed to the air around them. Not knowledge, not power, possibility. The walls pulsed, now glowing with new moments. A crew member's fear soothed by touch. Lyra's first memory of stars. The anomaly had not been waiting to test them. It had waited to join them. It's the interlink, now complete in intention, didn't just connect minds. It connected maybes. Futures. The crew uploaded their journey, and across the galaxy, the response was not applause or awe. It was stillness, a collective pause. And in that silence, people everywhere chose something simple to remember, to hum, to listen. The anomaly faded. Not gone, merged. And in every relay, a new harmonic sequence emerged. The final one. Cade had seeded before he died. Not a warning, a welcome mat. And as the ship returned, changed not by what it found, but by how it felt, the universe seemed smaller, not from shrinking, from holding hands. In a future so distant even memory starts to fade. A child will stand beneath the seed tree, now tall enough to kiss the clouds. That child will hum a tune they never learned, place their hand on the bark, and feel the pulse of 10,000 years, vibrating gently beneath their skin. They won't know the name Cade Mercer. They won't recite history books or recall wars. But they will know this: the universe listens when you do. Relay Zero will still stand, not as a monument, but as a conversation that never truly ended. Ships will come and go, species will rise and fall, but the pulse, the hum, remains. A rhythm born not from dominance or fear, but from the simple human act of caring when no one asked them to. And when someone asks, how did this all begin? The answer will be whispered, not shouted. Someone listened when no one else would. Across the stars, across timelines, across all the hidden corners of what could be, Cade's echo lives, not in fire or command, in harmony. I pause. In the fraction of a second before a child decides to reach instead of recoil. In that decision, the exam continues. And humanity continues to pass, not because they are perfect, but because they never stop trying. The interlink is now infinite. The trace now calm. The witness now joined. And somewhere in the stillness between galaxies, a new voice clears. Its throat, ready to sing. The smallest sound can reshape the stars. If you're quiet enough, if you truly listen, you'll hear it. Cade Mercer, a human, an echo. Reminder that sometimes the answer to the universe's greatest question, it's a song,